Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much to the Tippecanoe County Historical Association for inviting me to share everyone the life and legacy of LP Lindelof, who was my great grandfather. And so without further ado, I will get started. So we're going to start off with the history of the union. According to the IUPAT website, which is International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, because that's what the union is right now today. The union represents industrial painters, commercial and decorative painters, drywall finishers, glazers and glass workers, sign and display workers, trade show workers, floor covering installers, just to name a few. And that's from the IUPAT website. And they were very active during LP's time. They were very active in the film industry in Hollywood and as set decorators and animators. Well, with the union side of set decorators and animators. The Brotherhood of Painters and Decorators of America was organized in Baltimore, Maryland on March 15th, 1887. So they just celebrated their 138th. I'm sorry, do we have a monitor?
Oh, hold on one second.
Did I touch something?
You might have.
Sorry.
Be careful. Okay.
Nope.
No, okay. We're gonna reshare it. This one.
Okay. Oh, we lost video.
Yep, hold on one. Try pressing it again. It's up. Sorry, we're having a couple of technical difficulties here. I promise we tested it beforehand and it was working. So we're gonna.
That's the way it goes.
Yep. Sure is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely the way it goes. You are correct. Okay.
There it goes.
Okay, let me share the screen here.
Looks like we're sharing the screen.
Okay, can you press and check it? Press the button.
Right.
Oh. Nope.
There it goes.
Did it work?
Yep.
There we go. Sorry about that. Continue.
There we go. Okay, so getting back, the Brotherhood was founded on March 15th, 1887. And according to the historical data for Painters District Council 14 from 1950, the painters represented 15 different facets from all over the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and East Coast, including one from Canada. And they were craft clubs, guilds, society, lodges of the Knights of Labor. They met at the request of John T. Elliott. He is credited as being the founder of the Brotherhood. In 1892, at first, in St. Louis, St. Louis was considered the headquarters by General President J.W. McKinney. However, Elliott, who was the General Secretary Treasurer, he didn't want to move to St. Louis. He wanted to stay in Baltimore because he didn't want to leave his residence. From there, the Union would be broken up into factions that were either in support of Baltimore or Lafayette. This certainly would be true in Chicago. Eventually, they would line up with the Lafayette faction, just to make a long story short. And LU 180 in Oak Park, Illinois is noted for being the last Lafayette LU before the consolidation. In 1900, the name changed to Brotherhood of Painters, Decorators, and Paper Hangers of America. That year, on August 27th, 1900, at the AFL convention, Sam Gompers issued a new charter for the Brotherhood of Painters, Decorators, and Paper Hangers of America, Lafayette, Indiana. And that's from One Union, the History of IUPAT, 1887 to 2003. Originally, the Lafayette community, including the businesses, welcomed the union and it having a positive impact on the community. The union was provided 2 rooms at the Lafayette Commercial Club rent-free by the local businessmen. In 1903, they expanded to a larger office space on the corner of 4th and Ferry Streets. And while the headquarters was in Lafayette as early as 1903, the first international headquarters building was constructed in 1921, as you see here. And so other notable dates: in 1967, the headquarters was moved to Hanover, Maryland. And then in November 1970, they moved the headquarters to Washington, D.C., although they already had an office there in Washington, D.C., because L.P. Lindelof established an office there to be closer to the business of the federal government and the NLRB. So eventually, after a few name changes, they settled on International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. So from May to November 1893, that was called the Panic Days, and it was a major financial crisis followed by a depression. In that year, the 1893 World Columbian Exposition was occurring, and starting March 4th, 1893, Grover Cleveland began his second term as president, succeeding Benjamin Harrison. Chicago was rapidly modernizing after the Great Fire, and I think I read somewhere that it was the fastest growing economy in the world. So going back to Sweden, this is LP's early life in Sweden. This is a picture of his parents, Marna and Anders Lindelof, in Malmö, Sweden. Marna is on the left and Anders is on the right. And this is a picture of Lorenz when he was young. According to his immigration document and the St. Paul Church in Malmö household examination of 1893, at the time he left Sweden, which was researched by Lindelof's granddaughter Judith Riddell, he was living in the city of Malmö and working as a schmetzel. Smed translates as smith and Gesal translates as journeyman. His father was a blacksmith, and Lorenz had seemed to have been learning the trade as well. He arrived in Boston, Massachusetts on the SS America on September 11th, 1893. So he was really in the thick of things with the Panic Days. And his trade listed as a blacksmith, although he was listed as a painter's apprentice according to the program for the testimonial dinner by his future brother-in-law, William E. Rodriguez. He was also a mechanic, although he did not put that to use. And when he came to the US, he had difficulty learning the language and finding employment. During this time, Lindelof traveled the country looking for work of any kind. He worked on a railroad construction gang in Nevada and Wyoming, lumber camps in Michigan and Oregon, and strawberry farms in Louisiana. He got educated in the, quote, School of Hard Knocks. And up until 1901, the medium-sized cities had not organized painters union locals, and Aurora, Illinois was no exception. So we come to 1901, we come to Aurora, Illinois. And this is Lindelof's brother-in-law, William E. Rodriguez. It was in Aurora, Illinois that Lindelof met his future brother-in-law, William Rodriguez. He also boarded at William's sister's, Marge, boarding house. Lindelof was a painting contractor, so it was easy to get a job as a painter. It wasn't long after that Lindelof helped to charter LU 448 of the Brotherhood of Painters in Aurora, Illinois. And so our next stop in 1902 is Ottawa, Illinois. And this is a picture of LP and Marie in their early years. That's, of course, LP on the left, and that's his wife, Marie. And before we get to, since we got to know LP's parents, these are Marie's parents, Emilio Rodriguez on the left and Mary Meyer on the right. So it was through his brother-in-law that he met Marie Rodriguez. And on March 30th, 1902, they got married. It was 2 years later that they moved to Ottawa, Illinois. Soon after, he was painting churches as a charge man and superintendent for a firm around Kane and LaSalle counties. Marie recalled that he painted church ceilings while on his back. And they had a child at this time in September, Jewel Lindelof. So we fast forward a little bit in time to 1905, still in Ottawa, Illinois. And here are all the children of LP and Marie. So again, on the left is Jewel Lindelof. She was born in 1902. And on the right are Herbert and Marigold, or better known as Goldie Lindelof. Marigold was my grandmother. Herbert was born in November of 1905. Goldie was born in February of 1909. We don't have a picture of all three together. In July of 1905, Marie, Jewel, Flo, who was Marie's sister, and Flo's daughter, Bernice, were at the Lindelof house. Marie was pregnant with Herbert, and they had a gasoline stove. And it caught fire and exploded, which they were noted for doing back then. And Marie grabbed Bernice, rolled her up in a rug, and escaped. And Flo grabbed Jewel, and they tried to escape, but unfortunately, both Jewel and Flo did not make it. But Marie and Bernice were severely burned. And then 1906, LPL got his immigration naturalization card, or his naturalization card. He became a U.S. citizen. And Lindelof joined LU 465. At the time, the membership was down and he became active. He was able to re-energize the local membership by campaigning to raise the standard of wages and working conditions in LaSalle County. The membership more than doubled. As a result, both wages and conditions improved. He was elected treasurer and held that position until the spring of 1909. In March, he transferred to LU 180 in Oak Park, Illinois. It was at that time he started to work his way up the organizational chart. And in 1909, they moved to downtown Chicago, and they waited to move until after Marigold was born. So that takes us to Chicago. They lived in different places. I'm not going to go through all the places that they had addresses at. I'm just kind of just making just kind of simplifying it. So, but this so they moved to this building here on 163 West Ohio Street in downtown Chicago, and living in there was both LPL, Marie, Herbert, Marigold, and Edward Rodriguez. Edward was the brother-in-law to, or I should say, was the brother of Marie. So we now know about Edward, Marie, Marge, Flo, and Edward and William. So the struggle for Painters District Council 3 of the Painter, this talks about the struggle of PDC 3 of the Painters Union 1908 to 1912. There was a disagreement over Section 184 of the General Constitution between the district councils and some of the union locals. The real issue was between the Building Trades Department that the locals were going with and the Associate Building Trades Department, which the district council was represented. And the Painters and Decorators Club, which was an association to maintain signed wage agreements, had expired. Both sides tried to curry favors with the employers. But what really upset the rank and file is that the district council leadership had signed a 2-year wage agreement of 55 cents per hour without consulting the rank and file. So there was a lot of strikes, lockouts, chaos during this time. And what resulted in 10,000 members, half the membership were expelled. It was a crazy time in Chicago, and Lindelof became more active. PDC 3 was reorganized and chartered to District Council 14 in 1910. A.C. Anderson served as the first secretary treasurer. And in April of 1909, the LPL transferred to LU 180, and Lindelof was elected chairman of the trustees of the district council. In 1912, he was elected secretary treasurer, which is basically the boss of that particular district council, because the district council was made up of different business agents from different local unions. In 1912, in a few months, the district council and the rank and file were on better terms. And one of the issues that they had to deal with was kickbacks to contractors. One of the problems was that painting contractors were forcing painters to give back a part of the union scale of wages that are paid. Prior to 1912, Chicago contractors represented by what was termed the silk stocking bosses. They, the contractors, believed the greatest problem was to defeat the union, no matter how unreasonable. And the majority of contractors were not members of the Master Painters Association, but went along with them and mimicked their practices. So to fight this, Lindelof brought in contractors who were allies and formed the Progressive Master Painters Club of Chicago. Its principle was that no master painter could become a member of the association, nor could he continue his membership in the association unless he entered and maintained a signed wage agreement with the Painters District Council number 14. This eliminated of what was called the chiseling and kickback employer. During this period, there was one strike brought on by the Big Six contractors who refused to join the Progressive Master Painters Club, but it was short-lived and the Big Six were defeated. The Painting and Decorating Contractors Association became affiliated with the National Painting and Decorating Contractors of America. Another thing that he did while he was Secretary Treasurer of District 14, he developed a model apprentice program. And from the testimonial of William E. Rodriguez, he developed a model apprentice program recognized by the construction industry throughout America and by the United States Department of Labor as one of the top tier systems in the entire building industry. He was able to get one of the buildings in Chicago school system to be converted into a training school for apprenticeship of the building craftsmen. Painter apprentices were required to attend classes 1 day a week at no reduction in pay. Instructors were paid by the school board, and it was strictly a union apprenticeship school. And then they moved to 843 Sacramento Boulevard. They also had an address at 1457 Addison Street. But in early 1913, both Painters District Council 14 and the employers entered into a 2-year agreement. Wages would start out at 65 cents in 1913 and 70 cents in 1914. The Chicago painters had the highest wages in the country. Workers were to not work no more than 8 hours a day and paid double time on Sunday and holiday work. When a union member was killed, Lindelof sponsored a voluntary $1 fee among members to raise money for the family. And so this is a picture of him around 1915. So this is a tintype. Actually, the original negative of this photo is at the Chicago History Museum, and I think it's from the Chicago Daily News. The person without the hat is LPL, and the person next to him with the derby hat and the bow tie, that's Frank Curran. His nickname was Doc, and he was a business agent from LU 147. In the fall of 1921, Lindelof ran for general president and lost to George Hedrick at the Dallas Convention. He got his name out, and he may have lost, but he got his name out. The Landis Award went into effect on September 27, 1921. The award was an arbitration forced on the building trades in Chicago to have both wage reductions along with open and closed shops. Open shops being non-union workers and closed shops being union workers. The painters rejected working with non-union workers. Unions lost all gains they acquired since 1914. Wages decreased by 25% and were below what they had been in 1914. Lindelof refused to take a wage cut for the painters union of 30 cents per hour. That was what the Citizens Committee wanted him to take. He tried to negotiate a reduction of 15 cents per hour. While that was accepted by independent contractors, it was rejected by the Citizens Committee, and the Citizens Committee was a group of businessmen, bankers, and contractors who were organized to enforce the Landis Award on the unions. Members of the unions had been locked out of the painters and decorators contractors associations. Open shops could use any material they chose. Lindelof got the membership excited to fight back and reject the reduced wages that were insisted by the banker and businessman controlled citizens committee. The banks refused to hold money for the unions unless they accepted the Landis Award. The unions had to form their own banking system. Lindelof writes resolutions to form a labor bank. It was a 5-member committee, 2 of which are the president and the secretary. And they, June 1924, they were able to maintain their wages. Well, actually, that's enough. January 1922, the War on the Citizens Committee. The painters go on strike. On May 1st, 1926, the Landis Award ends. The movement was led by the painters and carpenters, since they were being hired by contractors outside of Chicago. According to basically what happened is that Chicago was growing, so they were actually getting the business outside of Chicago. And according to a newsletter write-up by Tom Knoll with the West Ridge and Rogers Park Historical Society, historian and gangsterologist Glenna Eves mentioned that 2 events shaped the 1920s. The first was Prohibition, and the other was the Landis Award. The Landis Award was handed down by Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and it reads as such. Glenna began the present. This is from the Gangsters of West Ridge, a walk through Chicago's roaring 20s. This is from September 17th, 2019. Glenna began the presentation by explaining that 2 events happening around 1920 changed the social and economic landscape of the United States. Prohibition took effect across the nation in January 1920. The culmination of nearly a century of temperance advocates' efforts, the 18th Amendment and the subsequent Volstead Act banned the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. As Al Capone said, this allowed bootleggers to give to the public what it wants. The second event was a court decision made by Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And if you know anything about Civil War history, Kennesaw Mountain was a battle in Georgia. And I think if I read correctly, Judge Landis's father was a Union soldier at that battle. Deflation after World War I led to labor and management stalemates on wage reductions, work rules, and many other issues. In an arbitration case between the 2 groups, Judge Landis allowed for wage cuts averaging 12.5%. The judge also struck restrictions on machinery, which saved labor, and established a standardized overtime rate. Disagreement regarding the acceptance of the Landis Award fragmented the labor movement, and violence ensued among the unions divided on these issues. So basically, there are unions in Chicago that went along with the Landis Award and those that refused to go along with it. And the ones that refused to go along with it were not happy with the ones that went along with it. And it kind of split up into the building. It got into the split up of the building and trades. It was kind of interesting. So adding to the conflict, contractors organized to reject workers from unions that disavowed the Landis Award, and they also hired enforcers to put down the resulting strike. So basically, the contractors sent in enforcers, or some people say gangsters, to go and try to break up the strikes. This chaos in the union movement allowed Chicago gangsters to intervene and offer to help laborers, thus gaining control of many unions and their monetary funds. And speaking of which, in this picture is Arthur Wallace, who was Lindelof's bodyguard. He was a business agent for LU 180 in Oak Park. Marie Lindelof referred to him as that bad man who went to the other side. According to her, this happened when the big boss came to town. There's a story where Art Wallace came to the door and Marie answered. Lindelof was hiding in the basement. Wallace asked if Lawrence was there, and she said no. He turned and left. Based on the minutes of the above ledger, it happened around October 1925, because it was like in September, LP was listed as the secretary treasurer, but then November, Art Wallace was listed as secretary treasurer. According to a dissertation written by Dr. Per Nordahl, he cites, and the dissertation is Weaving the Ethnic Fabric, Social Networks Among Swedish American Radicals in Chicago, 1890 to 1940. According to that dissertation, Dr. Nordahl cites an unpublished memoir typed by Myron Slim Brundage from LU 147, that is at the Newberry Library. Quote, our union boss for the whole city, Wallace, wasn't even a painter. He was hired as a bodyguard for the secretary of the district council, LP Lindelof. One day he put a gun in the old man's ribs and told him he was taking over. Once he was established in office, he controlled the election machinery and had no trouble getting reelected. Most of the membership hated him because he wasn't even a painter and he was a hoodlum. So I thought I'd throw in 1927, this address that LPO was listed at. CM Vardy and Company was an insurance broker, because about at this moment, LPL left for Indiana. That brings us to Hammond, Indiana. And I'm wondering if I guess, okay. If I can click on this without breaking it, this is a link.
It would probably open another one.
Okay. Okay, it will open up another window. And so what I will do is whoops. I did not want to bring that over. I want to bring this over.
There you go.
There we go. And I'm going to bring that one over. That's my list of people. And so this is the building that he lived in Hammond, Indiana, in the back. He lived here in the back of the rear of this little building. So I'm going to go, hopefully I can. Okay, good. So Lindelof left Chicago and transferred to LU 460 in Hammond, Indiana. Northwest Indiana was no stranger to him, as he already owned property in Cedar Lake. He lost the election for general secretary treasurer. He was then appointed national 5th vice president. The book One Union, The History of IUPAT, says that he was in charge of the industrial Great Lakes. But according to the testimonial by William Rodriguez, it was the Southern District. September of 1929, at the General Convention, he was unanimously elected general president of the International in Denver, Colorado. And that was the residence of Carl Mullen, who was chairman of the Indiana State Painters Conference. And so this is him as general president. And I do believe that that's at the building on 6th Street. Takes us to 1931, the Great Depression, and the New Deal. According to the book One Union, The History of IUPAT, 1887 to 2003, to get the union through the Great Depression, the General Executive Board temporarily suspended disability payments, then eventually reinstated them at a reduced rate. They put the organizers on a month unpaid leave. There were salary cuts for the officers. The General Executive Board issued document 111, which allowed locals to settle their dues just by paying the per capita tax. And if they couldn't pay, they got 3 months credit. Death and disability pay was cut in half. And I do believe I read somewhere that they were able to repay that after they got themselves out of the Depression. But Lindelof knew that the government had to step up and be the one to get the country out of the Depression. 2 programs for the New Deal that helped the Brotherhood were the PWA, like the Public Works Administration, and the CWA, Civil Works Administration. Eventually, the Wagner Act, the Wagner Act would benefit organized labor, and because skilled craftsmen were in high demand. So it takes us to this. Their residence, they had both, LPL had a He was listed both at 175 West Jackson Boulevard in Chicago and at 217, 219 North Sixth Street. Both Marie and LP had their address at the Sixth Street address. And then they lived at 615 North and at apartment 3. And takes us to 1936. This is a letter that that LP wrote to his daughter Marie. His daughter Marigold. Says, "Dear Goldie, glad to have received your letter, and as you say nothing to the contrary, I naturally assume you are well pleased with your position at Hinsdale. Hope it proves most interesting and satisfactory throughout." She was a teacher. "Think 27 holes of golf in one day a bit too strenuous for one like yourself who does not indulge more often, but occasionally perhaps 'twill do no harm. For the first time, note you are interested in the presidential campaign. This one is no different than any other, as always. There's more or less mudslinging, and many hidden facts are revealed and made public. By next week, I venture to say it will have gained so much momentum that none of the speakers will be particular what they say about each other. Both platforms have their good as well as bad points. To you and I, it will make very little difference who is president. It is the future generation that will have to suffer for the extravagances of the present administration. Generally speaking, organized labor is not in the least fearful of the outcome as we are. In the majority of places, sufficiently organized to maintain conditions for which we have to battle every inch of the way, in spite of who is president. And whether Roosevelt or Landon is elected, we will continue to have relief programs. They, Roosevelt and Landon, are of course the only two that need to be considered. While I am a Republican and intend to vote the Republican ticket, I'm a member of the National Executive Board of Labor's Nonpartisan League, of which our friend John Lewis is also a member. I consented to my name being used in order not to jeopardize the rights and privileges of any of our members who are employed on government projects. Regarding the building industry situation, it is easy to visualize that if President Roosevelt is reelected, John Lewis of the mine workers will be one of the most distinguished men in the country, as he will likely be chosen as a member of the president's cabinet, which will be most unfortunate. Our chief concern now is that President Roosevelt is surrounding himself with radical advisors who, if not altogether communists, are just on the borderline, and soon we fear we will be confronted with the same conditions as exist in Spain, Germany, and Russia, where labor organizations have been completely abolished and the government standardizes wages and conditions while they, the workers, have no say whatsoever. The AFL fight will, I believe, be a long drawn out affair. While true, overtures have been made by the garment and hat makers, yet I do not believe they are really sincere. Should they withdraw from the CIO and again affiliate with the AFL, to what I think be to get a seat in the convention where they would be afforded the privilege of speaking in behalf of the other CIO internationals that have not been seated. All depends on the outcome of John Lewis's efforts to organize the various industries, particularly the steel and rubber. If he is successful, the AFL will have to take a back seat. If not, his popularity will be at an end. Personally, do not think the workers can be successfully organized industrially. No, I did not read George E. Sokolsky's article, The Split in Labor, to which you refer, but we'll get the October Atlantic Monthly and read it. Incidentally, if afforded an opportunity, be sure to see the March of Time that is being shown at the various theaters. You will see and hear John Lewis, also President Green. William Green was the president of the American Federation of Labor. Also President Green, each of whom is making quite a play in regard to this particular subject. And that takes us to 1938, when they moved to 2 North 19th Street here in Lafayette. And there they remained for the rest of their lives. And then this is the house of Herbert and Edith Lindelof. Herbert was Marigold's, remember from the picture, Herbert was Marigold's brother. And along with their children, David and Larry, Herbert was assistant to the general secretary treasurer. They had a Chihuahua named Tippy. And then this is a picture of them here. Herbert is on the far left standing. Then that we believe that is Edith's, or her nickname was Dee's, sister Dorothy. And then in the center is Marie Lindelof. And then we're not sure who the gentleman is. And then Edith D. Lindelof on the far right. And then sitting would be LP. And then this is the 1943 AFL convention, and that's LP on the bottom left with his hand on his chin. And these are just various pictures from the testimonial dinners. And then he met many dignitaries like Francis Murphy, the governor of Vermont, and I think I read somewhere he met the governor. He had a meeting with the governor of Indiana. And this is from the testimonial dinner, and I thought I'd show this one because this is from the Moving Picture Painters and Scene Artists Local Union 644. That was part of the Painters Union at the time. And then also part of the painters at the time was the United Scene Artists. And this is a picture of LP with Nelson Eddy at MGM Studios. He was involved with the strike 37, I think it was, with the Federation of Motion Picture Crafts. The painters were the lead striking body. Then there was the Disney animator strike at Walt Disney in 1941. And then the Hollywood strike of 1945, where Herbert Sorrell was the president. He was a painter, and he was also president. He was a member of Local 644, from what I read. And also, so he was president of the Conference of Studio Unions. And this goes into a little bit about the Hollywood. This is a letter where he talks with Goldie about a meeting in January 1945, about a meeting with the Hollywood studio producers and Eric Johnston, who was the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Eric Johnston would later become president of the Motion Picture Association of America. And Lindelof mentions how it looks like there will be another Hollywood strike. He mentioned in the talks that the talks have left everyone dissatisfied but himself, and that all the decisions were in his favor, and he got more than he asked for. Although that came up, I don't know about, because that I got more than I asked for. That came up again in the testimony. He had to testify in front of a House subcommittee on education and labor on the Hollywood strike. And that phrase came up in there. So I'm not sure where that came up again, but so get caught up in my notes here. So the Hollywood strike was considered by some a jurisdictional strike, as the IATSC believed that one union should serve set decorating versus the Conference of Studio Unions that were a federation of different unions. The IATSC was out to label the CSU as communist. The president of the CSU was Herbert Sorrell, who was a member of Local 644, the Motion Picture Painters Local 644. If I'm not mistaken, he was from Indiana, and Herbert Sorrell was president of the CSU, and the Hollywood strike is also known as Black Friday, or some people call it Bloody Friday. It is considered the most violent, or if not one of the most violent strikes in Hollywood's history. It was later revealed that Sorrell had ties to communists, and Lindelof did have to testify in front of a House subcommittee on education and labor that was investigating the jurisdictional dispute in the motion picture industry. Sorrell was eventually kicked out of the union. And of course, Martin Durkin in the center of this picture, he was one of the big three AFL unions, representative of one of the big three AFL unions in the Hollywood strike. He would later become Secretary of Labor in the Truman administration. And the caption says, talking it over, heads of the big three AFL unions involved in the film industry strike in Hollywood are left to right. Richard Walsh, New York, president of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Martin Durkin, Washington, president of the Plumbers Union. And LP Lindelof, Indianapolis, president of the Painters Union. So he got an invitation to attend the inaugural ball. This is in our collection. He got an invitation to attend the inaugural ball of Harry Truman. We're not sure if he attended. We don't have any documentation, but we do have the invite. And of course, this is a letter from John Roy Steelman, who is the assistant to the President of the United States, wishing him a happy birthday. And his nickname was either Lindy. And so he retired on September 1st, 1952. A resolution was passed to include 2 years, his 2 years as National Fifth Vice President, making his tenure in the national level 1927 to 1952. And this is kind of a paperweight that's floating around there in his honor. And of course, a lot of you may be familiar with that monument. October 19th, 1952, he had a heart attack and died in his home in Lafayette. And I'll read the accolades. Our beloved General President Lawrence P. Lindelof is one of God's great noblemen who has given his all through the years of the past for the betterment of mankind, and Local Union 180 endears him for the years he spent as a brother member, a loyal friend, and a counselor. Another quote, he has risen and is recognized as one of the leading statesmen in the organized labor movement. Another one is he was acquainted with many. His knowledge of the needs and protection of rights of the toilers was unexcelled, a deep thinker, studious, diligent, and careful and deliberate planner in all his undertakings. In 1929, a Swedish newspaper described him as one of the most ardent spokesmen for the 5-day work week. And some of his accomplishments became first vice president of the Building and Trades Department of the American Federation of Labor, initiated an office in Washington, D.C. to work with government entities such as the National Labor Relations Board, provided leadership during the Hollywood strikes of 1937, 1945, and the Disney animator strike of 1941. He also helped develop an apprentice program for veterans, navigated the union through the Great Depression, and September 1st, 1952, he retired at the rank of General President Emeritus. And I know I just want to get my phone here because there's a quote on there that I like that I just want to read, if you don't mind. It says, and this was part of his testimony in the Hollywood strike, we have always believed in cooperation. We have always believed in sitting down and trying to work out the differences and difficulties with our employers. In our agreements, we have setups for the disputes between employer and employee, not only locally, but nationally. And this is more who was on for the dedication of the monument. William Rodriguez, who was his brother-in-law, George Tuckbrider, who was a very close friend of his, Michael DiSilvestro, and others. And of course, I just thought I'd share the plot of the family at Springvale. Larry Lindelof, who was, I believe he did work for the work in the union for a short time. He passed away April 19th, 1972. Edith Olson Lindelof passed away June 4th, 1972. Herbert Lindelof, March 11th, 1967. And Marie Lindelof on April 20th, 1977. And with that, thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for me?
Yes.
Well, I have 3, so.
Okay.
Okay, one question is, I was a little confused when you were explaining during the Great Depression. I thought you said that Lindelof believed that the federal government was necessary to help.
Yes,
You know, get out of the depression.
yeah,
But then, that letter, he said, you know, I'm voting Republican, and he
That-
seemed extremely mistrustful of FDR.
right, and that's one of the interesting things about him. But because he did recognize that the federal government was, you know, there as a resource and as a vehicle to advance you know, the labor movement.
Right.
And so he did recognize that, and, but that's the very interesting things about, and that's the complexity about him.
Okay.
That's, you know, that's the very, he did, and as in the letter, he was Marie and, let's just put it that, Marie and Marigold were very progressive. William was his brother-in-law was a socialist. And so he was very open to working with other people, and he was not going to shut the door. And so he was always considering, and that's on the quote, he was always, with the quote at the end, he was always willing to cooperate and work together. He had his opinions, you know, and then in that, though, he was a member of the nonpartisan league, along with John Lewis. So he did have his opinions, personal opinions, but he saw that, you know, in order to advance, he had his own way of advancing the labor movement. They kind of saw it on the same grounds, but they didn't, you know, it's a very complex situation.
Thank you, that's a big help. I mean, I've got two more, but if somebody else wants to ask a question, I'll hold off. Oh, okay, all right, so my next question is, you know, these wonderful photos that you've shown us and that you discovered. When he became a union leader and was he still painting?
That's a good question. When he was secretary treasurer, I think that he would be more on the business side. This is just my opinion. And he knew the business of painting. And so I believe he was more on the business sides of working and negotiating the contracts. But he had to understand the business so that, you know, he could lead the rank and file and then guide the district council. Or when he was general president, you know, he understood the issues when new technologies came out. Of course, there's always the question, will it replace workers? And not only that, but what's how safe are they? I was talking earlier with some people, we were talking about spray guns, and that came up. And, you know, how many, you know, should we allow it? But also, they were talking about in the convention, they were talking about the safety of paint because it was lead-based paint. And so they were thinking about how do we make it a better working environment and to protect our workers from those things, or how do we make better paint so that it doesn't happen? It's, you know, I think that he was a painter. I'm not sure if he was actually painting while he was in his office position.
Yeah.
But he certainly understood the complex issues of the change, how the industry was evolving and how the union had to be involved in that discussion.
This is great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is just terrific. Okay, I've got one last, it's a bit of a question and a comment. You know, it's really striking to me that from the information that you've been able to discover, it doesn't appear that he had much formal training in painting, but he was a real big proponent of establishing apprenticeships and educational systems so that professional painters would be well prepared. I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely, and you know, I think it also has something to do with his background and his well, yeah, he was, you know, as I said, that he was from the School of Hard Knocks, but you know, he had these apprentice programs. You know, again, you know, it's just I think education was a big part of the family core lives. Marigold, sorry. Marigold, his daughter, became a teacher, and I know his brother-in-law and his wife wanted Marigold to go to college. And I know his brother-in-law was very, very educated. He was an attorney, actually. And so, yeah, education was very big, it's passed down to me, actually. I'm an educator. So through that funnel of, so.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for those great questions.
Any final questions?
Did you ever read anything about the building on Sixth Street? You know, the design of it's really unique and
No,
it just really stands out.
Yeah, I'll have to get into that and why they built it that way. Yeah,
Okay.
about the architecture. and what-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Okay, I've never seen any pictures of the interior. I'm sure it was beautiful when it was,
Oh,
you know,
yeah. I
Anderson Decorators headquarters.
Yeah, I grew up in a house, most of my life, I grew up in a house that was built in 1887. So it had pocket doors, the elaborate, wooden fireplaces. It was not a wood fireplace, it was a coal fireplace. And so very, it's just, but it was made out of, red maple wood. And so it was solid and it had a stone foundation. So, I did some research on that, but yeah, I would be interested in seeing if I'm always constantly looking for that sort of thing to see what it was like inside that building.
Yeah, it seemed like from the pictures that all his residences were fairly modest. I mean, they weren't, you didn't live in a mansion anywhere or anything.
No, he didn't.
Uh-huh.
No, he didn't live in no, he didn't. In fact, when
Yeah,
they first,
apartments even, yeah.
yeah, when they first lived in Ottawa, Illinois, I think their houses were very small. And so,
Well, it's more statements, but I'm fascinated. We talked a little bit about it, but this, I found myself so on, in Chicago, one of the addresses,
Sacramento Boulevard,
Right.
yeah.
So right above that is a film studio. That's a small film. It's MK Films, and there's a school right there. And I've been by that.
Oh, wow.
And so that's not the biggest thing. So on North Street, when I first moved to town, I almost moved into that house.
Oh, wow,
I
okay.
almost.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot, and then you talk about Kennesaw, and I know a lot about that because of like Aime out.
Oh, yes.
So he was the baseball, yeah.
Yeah, he was the
one.
commissioner, yeah.
Yeah, but I also had some interesting things in my family, which we, for the Fichettes were part of the votes, Pittman, whatever.
Oh.
But Kennesaw pay for a lot of government weird shit.
Oh, wow.
But he did, with gangsters and weird, like the labor unions to keep things at an interesting balance.
Oh,
He
wow.
did take kickback.
Oh, that's very
Yeah, so
interesting.
He got in trouble for a lot of the socks and a whole bunch of stuff, but he was really well respected. And I like that you mentioned also his grandfather or his dad and stuff, and why he got his name. Because that's really cool. He had his hands in a lot in the Chicagoland area. So,
Yeah, that's,
So we might have, my family maybe in some weird ways might have weird stuff because they mixed with the unions. The gangsters actually did a lot with unions. They actually supported them. So
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, there's more of a statement. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, that's great.
All right, well, once again, thank you so much, Will, for joining us this evening. And we're so glad that you've done all this research. It's always
Yes,
fascinating
yes.
to have those local history stories told more. So
Oh,
we're
my
thankful
pleasure.
for
And
that.
thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Great.